Well, says it doesn't have to be the end. Yeah, it doesn't have to be. I've been saying like I'm thinking about doing more, just based on how this has gone, which I think is really good. I'm thinking about doing more, but I am going to take a little bit of time to shift into trying to make good on the promises that I've made to everybody, which is when you finish your final project, I'm going to do my best to try to send you on to places where you can interview for jobs. And I guess like the other promise is that it sounds like we're going to be able to send some people to RailsConf, which is super, super exciting. So I'm going to spend a couple of weeks trying to figure out the details of all those things, and then hopefully get back to you soon. It's some people are talking in the chat. Looks like Joe is talking about the number of people in the class going down. What's really neat is that actually, like in the beginning of the class, I think I maybe talked about this a little bit, but in the beginning of the class, the drop off is more significant. We'd see something like 10 or 20 people drop off every session. And actually, for the last, since session 8, we've actually only dropped 10 people. So that's pretty amazing. Number of class, I see what you're saying. Joe's saying the countdown of the number of classes. Yes, the number of classes is dropping by 1. Some talk about Eileen is a speaker at RailsConf. Yes, Eileen is a speaker at RailsConf. I'm actually going to be in her session for a little bit too, which is fun. Lynn says, attending every day, we'll have to catch up super async. Let's see if I can do this. I'm happy to see you do it. I believe in you, and let me know if there's anything I can do to help you. A lot of people are having success just kind of watching the sessions multiple times. Eric says, the more you talk about people dropping, the more people hold on. That's funny. Yeah, I like thought a bit about whether or not I should be telling everyone the amount of people and like telling people kind of what the drop off rate is. But I thought a similar thing to what you're saying, which is that if people heard the expectation that people would drop, that it might encourage them to keep going. I think that could go either way. That could have backfired on me. Yeah, Lynn, if you want any guidance, feel free to just drop something in the chat and we'll try to help you. Nice, Isaiah helping someone out in the Women in Web Dev Facebook group with Click event. So we're paying dividends already. We're not only teaching people, but we're also teaching people how to help other people, which is great. And also, you I'm sure understand, like you're saying, how good a feeling it is to help someone. I think one of our speakers covered like when you really know something, you have to really know something in order to teach it. Or even that sometimes the way it works is that when you teach something, it kind of cements your knowledge in that thing. So a lot of times by teaching, you can actually get an even better understanding of the thing that you're saying. Okay, so I'm going to spend some time with some questions for a little bit. Ooh, Kevin, Disney with the 5-year-old. Nice. I hope, I assume Disney World, viewing from your phone and you'll rewatch tonight. Yeah, good job. Good job to you. Good job keeping it up. Definitely enjoy the time with your family. I'm not going to Disney World because I swore I would never go to Disney World again after the last time. But we are going down to Florida at the end of the week on Friday. So I'm excited to be down there. Manon says, I was so happy today when Rails console didn't work and I was just able to make a page to add animals to a database. Yeah, that was funny yesterday with the Rails consoles not working. not working with the settings yesterday, and people were asking, how do I get things into the database? And it's like, well, you can do it. You have all the pieces, right? Make a form. That form writes into the database. So that's how it works. Eventually, the Rails console is something that you really don't need other than to inspect things a little bit. Ruel says, "What's wrong with Disney?" Nothing. I went there and like, I mean, I've been there a bunch of times, but I went there the most recent time with my kids, and I think like they were past the Disney is magic age, which is like, that's the best part of Disney World, is bringing kids there and just like letting them experience, like they think all of this is maybe real. They don't understand what's going on. They're in the world of all these great characters. But there's like a thing that happens with children where eventually they cross the line and all of a sudden they understand that like Disney World is about commerce. It's about getting things. It's about like trying to fit in as much as you can. And like that version of Disney, at least in Florida, is less fun for me, because I want the kids to be happy and excited, less like just like they're trying to get something. I hope that makes sense. So my oldest child is 11, and yeah, Disney's magic age is the best. Now I will say, yeah, you actually said the thing that I was about to say already, which is that if you're an adult and you go to Disney by yourself, I will admit that is a super good time, because you actually have you've left the magic age, and then you've went through the I just want to get everything age, and then you've kind of re-entered the magic age, but with a different eye. So now your eye, instead of saying like, oh my God, I'm in a Disney kingdom, all of a sudden your eye is saying like, how did they even do this? And I think that part is super fun to go back as an adult, and especially to drink in Epcot. Cool. Okay, I'm going to spend some time with some questions, then we're going to review the homework, and we're going to do the same kind of thing that we've done every day of the course. Anonymous attendee says, were exercises reviewed for session 14 for anyone? We have not reviewed the session 14 exercise yet, but I'm going to do it just in a minute. Attendee says, what is your opinion on unpaid internships that require 20 to 30 hours of work a week? Do not take an unpaid internship. They're not good for your resume, I don't think, because the person is not going to like, if someone can't afford to pay you, then they probably can't afford to like train you or give you good work. So you're going to end up just doing a bunch of remedial work for free. Unpaid internships hopefully are a thing of the past at this point. Don't take one. You're better than that, and you can take a paid internship. Lil says, I feel like my progress has slowed down a bit, but mainly due to technical issues. Hanging in there though. Lil, I was trying to help you a little bit in the chat earlier, but if there's anything I can do to help, you can feel free to DM me, or we can keep talking in the chat. Feel free to mention me, and I will do my best to help you out. If you're having technical issues with code spaces in particular, there's a couple fixes that I put out yesterday. And also if it's getting really, really frustrating, then I would suggest maybe trying to figure out how to run it locally, which I know a lot of people have put links to things like Go Rails, which can help you get it set up. And if you're on a Mac computer, it's particularly easy to set up because it's kind of like already set up by default. It exists, Ruby's installed by default. Kevin says, I had an interview today and they bring everyone in as an intern, but they are paid, fingers crossed, back-end role. That's amazing to hear. If there's any kind of recommendation that I can offer, Kevin, let me know. And additionally, just want to highlight again, there are plenty of paid internships in the world. Do not take a free internship. It's not worth your time. Munir says, can you please do a brief rundown on resources? Yeah, I can. I'll do that in a minute. So I'm going to keep this question sitting around for a second. Anonymous attendee says, what is your finger tattoo? Just curious. Yeah, so this is my only tattoo. And it's actually, you can't really see it, but it's my wife's name, Catherine, on my ring finger on my left hand. So it's actually a replacement for my ring. It's just my wife's complete name. Uh, no, I never lost it. I just, I work in a shop a lot, so I got tired of taking it off and kind of putting it down and trying to put it on again, and then I wouldn't wear it. So now I can't forget it. It's on my finger forever. My friend's husband lost it day 0. So Olawason says, hey, John, please teach on gem and how Ruby handles installing gem locations and how it relates to Rails. I'm actually going to teach gems today. So good timing on the question. Rajesh says, question from last video, when I do fetch, which one would appear? I'm not able to understand the behavior. If it's still unclear after we cover fetch in the homework review, please let me know. Felipe says, I guess other people are in my case are similar. I have a side project which started in Java and later as a PWA and PHP. Do you recommend starting from scratch with Ruby as the final project? So I'll give out all the details about how the final project is going to work tomorrow. It's not just going to be completely open-ended. It's not just like do whatever you want. There will be some requirements, and definitely one of those requirements is that the project is written in Ruby and Rails. And the only reason for that is because like that's what the course is in. So of course, to review the final project, I want to review something that's relevant to what I taught. Andre says, I saw that GitHub has a desktop app. Would you recommend using it versus the command line? Yes, the GitHub Desktop App makes it easy to interact with Git, which normally you'd have to interact with via the terminal alone. So if you're just getting started in programming and you don't want to have to figure out Git and things like that, and you're not using something like code spaces to write code, which you probably aren't, then the GitHub Desktop App is a fantastic way to get going. There are many professional developers as well that use the GitHub Desktop App instead of the terminal. So if you're the type of person that prefers visual tools over just like a wall of text, please just download that app. It makes things a lot easier. Ernest says, Sean, I want to say thank you. I've become pretty confident in Ruby and Rails due to this bootcamp. I appreciate you. Ernest, I appreciate you too. I'm sorry that I haven't gotten to your email, but I promise I'm going to get to it very soon. I've just been a little bit overwhelmed the past couple of days. So I will absolutely respond to you. And I appreciate you being in the course and saying nice things about what you learned here. Rajesh says, I meant to fetch in one function. So if you're trying to call 2 fetches in one function, that is going to be complicated. And I will try to cover why it's complicated in the exercise here. Hello, John. I am Anon says, hello, John. I'm having trouble with the all aboard Slack. It just won't load for me. I was wondering if anyone else is having that issue. I haven't heard any issue like that. Have you, if you've not been able to successfully get on the Slack at all, maybe someone here can drop the link for the invitation to the Slack, but I think it's working correctly. I'm also not sure what country you're in, but maybe there's a issue with only Slack in that country or something similar. But from everything I've heard, Slack is working like normal. Okay, Adnan is in Virginia, so I don't know if anyone's having a similar problem with Slack, but if you are, please just drop it in the chat here. Okay. Julianne says, I have a question on the homework. I was able to send number and objects to the render JSON, number or object. However, when I did a string, I wasn't getting the data. Can you explain why this happens? Julianne, let me run through the homework and see if you can spot the difference between what I'm doing and what you're doing. And if you don't, then ask a kind of a more specific version of that question, and I'll be happy to talk about it. Rajesh says, I found exercise 14's last question 10 times harder than the usual homework. Yes, that is definitely true. Exercise 14's last question requires one of 2 things. Either you to really think hard about how to write it, or to know something that I haven't taught yet. So both of those are acceptable solutions. I was either hoping that you would go find the thing, or that you would figure out how to use the pieces that I've taught to put it together. So we're going to go through both today. So I hope that helps. Okay, so let me share my screen and figure out Zoom controls. For some reason, as soon as I start sharing the screen, it like hides all the things that I want to be able to see. So that's why I have to do this every day. Rob says I got exercise 3 done 30 minutes before class. Yeah, great job. And the thing you're saying after that, which is also great, I want to point out the thing that you're saying after that, because I think that's really, really, really important. I keep trying to emphasize this in the class, is that it takes a lot of piece by piece tests. So verifying that you can solve one part of the problem at a time. And once you can solve one problem, only then do you move on to the next problem. It's kind of saying like, oh, from here back, everything that I've already figured out, like, let's just like cement that in place. I'm not going to touch that anymore. Now all I'm focused on the next piece. And we'll do that as we're going through the homework here. Because of the way that I've been working in the class for the last couple of days, I've been creating apps for every day. I'm going to do the same thing today. So remember, the way that I do it is I do Rails new, and I say the name of the app. Okay, so it's going to go through installing an app and installing Webpacker. But in the meantime, you can see that there's a new folder on the left-hand side called 15. I'm going to right-click on these files, and I'm just going to close all of them. So now I'm kind of sitting in the directory of my new app. And once this finishes, we'll do the one other thing that we have to do in order to have this set up in our repository, which is to remove the .git directory from the new folder that we're creating. Also, just while this is loading, I'm going to show everyone, if you're having trouble with the new version of Codespaces, you can click the little gear icon here, and you can go here, and there'll be a thing that says switch to stable version. If you click that, it should solve some of the problems that people have been seeing. Okay, so we're going to go into the 15 directory, and we're going to rm-rf.git, which will remove the git subfolder. And then we're in here, we're just a normal Rails app. So because we're a normal Rails app, should we be able to do Rails S? And when we do that, we should be able to get our app starting to load. And of course, we're going to get that error that we get every time. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go into config application. And in here, I'm just going to drop that line. Now I kill my server. Control C, I restart it, and I run again. And look, we're on Rails. Okay, so the exercise 14 homework starts with the implementation of an animal model, which contains the name of an animal, the URL of an image, and a word representation of the sound that it makes. We can do that. So when it says that we want a new model, we're going to open a new terminal, and we're going to type Rails G model animal. Oh, we're in the wrong directory, sorry. Rails G model animal. Okay, so when we do Rails G model animal, it's going to create our migration. Let's open that up because that's the thing we want. Now in here, we need the name of an animal, which is going to be a string. We need the image URL, which is going to be a string, and that's going to be the URL of an image of that animal. And then we need a sound, and that's also a string. So 3 strings. The name of the animal, so that'll be a cat, the image URL, which is an image of a cat, and then sound, which will be something like meow. Now that we've done that, we'll do Rails DB migrate. Okay, and that creates our table in the database. So just to answer a couple quick questions. Can JavaScript access resource routes? We're going to cover that hopefully today in the course. It's on my list of things to cover. Rajesh says, sometimes the URL is more than 255 characters. If it's more than 255 characters, then instead of string, you're going to look for something called blob. And you can do the research on that. So just search for Rails blob. Okay. So we've done that. We've created the model just like it says. Let's put a couple animals in there kind of while we're sitting here. So we're going to open the Rails console in order to put some animals in. And we'll do animal.create. Andre, if you're confused by the rake Rails thing, it was just a typo. You can use Rails instead. All that Rails does is it will call rake for you. It's an old way to do things, and that's the only reason that my hands just type it automatically, because I can't stop. The same reason that I'm typing single quotes everywhere. It's hard to stop. It's hard to stop once you learn to type something. To do a certain task, you just kind of automatically type it. Okay, so we're going to look for creating an animal that's a cat. So we'll say cat. A cat in American English, at least, makes a meow. In Italian, it makes a mow, which I always thought was funny. It doesn't make meow, it makes mow. And then your image URL, we're going to need an image of a cat. So now we get to do a fun image of a cat search. We get to grab a cat. We can click copy image address. Just to make sure that's an image of a cat, we can go to it and look, it's a cat. So we're going to put that into our image URL. Okay, so now we have something in our database. Maybe we'll put one more because we promised that maybe there would be multiple, and I think there's even a challenge in here that has to do with ordering them. So I'm not only going to put one more, but I'm also going to make sure that it has a name that is before cat in the alphabet. So what's a name that has before cat? Aardvark is the name. Does anyone know what sound an aardvark makes? I'm going to say that aardvark makes a kind of a rah-rah. Most certainly not right. Okay. Aardvark. Yeah, if it's like Pokemon, then it definitely says ard. So we'll search aardvark image. We'll go here. We'll find this cute / maybe disgusting animal. I can't tell. We'll go there. It doesn't look too bad. Okay, and then we'll put that image URL into our database. Okay, cool. Next, we're going to create a page at /animals to list all of the animals in your database. Okay, so the easiest thing that I think of when I think of /animals is I think let's create a resource. And the reason that I think let's create a resource is because remember when I write resources animals, one of the things that's going to create, and this is getting to Manir's question, when I write resources animals, it's actually doing a couple things. And what I will do in order to show you what it's doing, I'll exit my console and I'll write Rails routes. And then I'm going to write grep animal. And these are the list of routes that get generated for you automatically by Rails when you write resources. Okay, so when you write resources animals, it's the equivalent of actually creating all of these routes. And the one that we're particularly interested in for this is this one. So the way that you would write that if you wanted to without resources is you would write get /animals, controller animals, action index as animals. So I could have written this, but like, it's just a lot more typing. So instead I write resources animals, and that not only generates the route that I want, but it also generates all these other routes. So I hope that makes sense. Resources is just a shortcut for defining a bunch of routes that are the typical routes that you would want to define. in order to get basic CRUD operations, which remember stands for create, read, update, delete. Okay. So hopefully that helps. So once I've defined that route, I'm just going to define it as resources. We can actually go to /animals. Oh no, what it's saying is that we have migrations that need to run. I don't see any migrations that need to run. Okay, so now what it says is uninitialized constant animals controller. So it's telling us exactly what the problem is. If the console doesn't work, you have to switch to the stable version of Codespaces. And if you're having other problems with it, just drop them in Slack and we'll try to help you out. Okay, so we need to create a constant called animals controller. We're going to do that by using Rails G controller animals. Okay. So we've generated an animals controller, and let's open up the, oh, I spelled it wrong. I think this has come up before, but if you spell it wrong, you can actually delete them using Rails D. And then we'll fix the spelling and switch it to Rails G. And now we have the file that we actually wanted, which is the animals controller. Now, if I go back and I refresh the browser, what it's going to say is, oh, the action index. So now I've found animals controller, but the action index can't be found. So let's just make it. Inside of the index route, we know that we want to be able to show all of the animals. So we're going to create an instance variable that holds all of the animals. And then we refresh. And now what it's saying is that animals controller index is missing a template for the request formats text/HTML. So what it's saying is that, okay, I found your route, I found your controller, I found your action, but now you're still missing the actual thing that you want to display. You're missing an index. So what we will do is we will create that index. We're going to do that by going to the left bar here, going to app, rolling down until we get to views, creating a new file in the animals folder called index.html.erb. Now, if we put something in here, we write something like hello world, and we refresh, we should see hello world. Okay. Now, the actual promise of exercise 2 was not that we would just make a page that said hello world, but actually we would go and display all the animals. So let's go do that. For that, we're going to use an ERB tag. And remember, we already have an instance variable called animals, so we can pick that up inside the view. And we can do animals.each do animal. And now inside this loop, we can create a div to contain our animal. And what was supposed to be inside of it? It was supposed to be an image tag, which is the animal image URL. So remember, image tag is a helper that takes the URL of an image. So we're just going to take the URL that we have and we're going to pass it to image tag. And then we also wanted the animal's name. Okay, so we refresh and like, wow, those are really big. Those are like insanely big. Like this cat is like life size. But we don't want the cat to be life size. We want it to be smaller. So we'll use a little bit of CSS to make it smaller. We'll go into our div, and instead of writing just div, I'm going to write div class equals animal. And then I can go into a style sheet. One's already been created for me called animals. So we're going to open that up. And we can add some style for animal. In this case, I'm going to say, oh, the width of an animal is 500 pixels. Oh no, it didn't work. We're going to say, okay, the width of an image inside of an animal tag. So this is the image tag inside of an animal tag. Remember, we covered in CSS is 500 pixels. And now when I refresh, you can see things get smaller. They don't look like 500 pixels, and the only reason for that is because I'm zoomed. So if I actually zoom back to my normal size, this is what you get instead. But we don't want to turn the zoom down. So what I will do instead is I will, instead of setting the width to 500 pixels, I'm going to set it to 200 pixels. So now we refresh, and we have a cat, and we have an aardvark. Okay. So that is exercise 2. And of course, here it says bonus points if you find out how to sort them by name. So there are actually a few ways that we can sort them by name. And I'm going to show you a couple of them. And I'm going to show you the trade-offs of why you might want to use one over another. The first one is we can use the Ruby method sort by. So remember, sort by takes a block, gets the individual animal, and then you will return the thing you want to sort by. So in this case, I'm going to sort by animal.name. Okay, so I'm going to sort by the names of the animals. So what that's going to do is it's going to rearrange all of the animals so that they're ordered by name. So if I refresh, that works. So why would I maybe not want to do that is that when I do this, it's going to go to the database. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to get all of the animals. And then in Ruby, it's going to sort them. But there's actually a way that we can just tell the database to give them back sorted. So instead of us sorting them in Ruby, we can just say to the database, instead of saying, give me all the animals, we can say, hey, give me all the animals in order. It's going to be less code and it's going to be faster. So let's take away this part here. And instead, what I'm going to write is animal.all.order name. So this is a particular option that can work in Active Record that just takes all the animals and orders them by name. So if we refresh again, you see that it works the same way. And just to show a bit what's going on there, I'm going to go back to my Rails logs and I'm going to show you the 2 queries. So in the second example that I showed, the one where we're asking the database, here's what it looks like. Select animals from animals, order by name. In the first example, it looks like this. Select animals from animals. Okay. Now, one thing you might be thinking is, how could it be faster? Why would it be faster? Why does it matter where we do it? And I want you to go through a mental exercise real quick, which is, imagine at the end of this, I said I only wanted to take the first 5. And then I refresh the page again. So it's going to work the same way because we only have 2. But look what happens here. In the first example where I was sorting in Ruby, what's going to happen is it's still going to say select animals from animals. So it's going to get all of the animals. And then in Ruby, it's going to order them, and then it's going to pick only the first 5. So if you had like 10,000 animals, you would pull back all 10,000 from the database just to sort them, just to get the first 5. But in the second example, where I do order.first5, let's see how the query looks. It looks like this. Select animals from animals, order by name, limit 5. Okay. So the reason it's faster in this case is because the database is the thing in charge of doing the limiting and the ordering. So it only sends back the things that we actually need instead of all the things. So this is just something to keep in mind when you're building applications and you're thinking about performance. You want to rely on the database and its capabilities as much as you reasonably can. Okay, so that's a little bit outside the context of the exercise, but let's keep going. How is Aloysian says, how is order different from reorder? I would just go look up the docs if you're interested in that. But in this case, they are the same. In animals sort by, okay, so someone's asking a question they have seen. Okay, imagine I was writing the code like this. They saw someone write the same code as this. I believe I covered this in a previous episode, or sorry, session, but kind of said that you should know what it does, but not really think too much about using it. But this is just a shortcut for this. So when you use this ampersand colon, all it's saying is, I know that the method you're going to call is on the same thing that you are passing into the block. So just, I can shortcut everything. I don't have to give it a temporary name just to call it with .name at the end. Just call .name on each of the things, and that's how you implement it. So these are the same. They work the same way. So if you're interested, you can read more about it. It's called toProc form. This is called toProc, but you really, you don't need to know it other than to know when you see this, you can kind of translate it in your head to this expanded form. Andre says, I've created a wrong animal and tried to destroy it with animal.destroy ID equals 2. So the way that destroy works is not like that. You don't pass an ID to destroy. You would find, so the way that Andre is trying to do it in the destroy is trying to write animal.destroy2. That's not how it would go in active record. What you'd actually do instead is you would find the record, find by ID is 2, and then you would destroy that record. Rajesh says, difference between filtering a controller and then doing it in the views. You should not be using animal.all in your views at all. So when we're thinking about the model view controller architecture, the controller is the thing in charge of interacting with the models, not the views. So I've been trying to kind of say that throughout the course, but the idea is that your controller should work with your models. Your views should only get data from your controllers. Okay, cool. Exercise 3. We want it so that when you click an animal, we send the ID of the animal to the server via JavaScript using a resource that responds with JSON and opens an alert containing the sound that the animal makes. Phew, that is a lot. Okay. So what I'm going to do, the first thing I need to be able to do is I need to be able to understand on the page when you click an animal. So we're going to need some JavaScript in order to do that. Let's go to the JavaScript folder. And first we have to open our pack and we have to add that require line, require ... and in this case, we'll call it animals. When we did that, we want to create a new file, which I'm going to call animals.js. And just to make sure that I've got that part working, I'm just going to write a console.log hello world. So now if I go to my page, I open the inspector over here and I refresh. And I can make that a little bit bigger. We see hello world pop over on the right-hand side, which means our JavaScript is working. We are able to execute JavaScript on the page. Okay, so what we've done now we need to be able to respond to a click. So what we're going to use for that is add event listener, click. No, the file does, you don't have to specify the JS extension for the file. So what we'll do is we're going to respond to click with a function called handle click. Remember, when we click, we get the click event in. In order to turn the click event into the element, we do clicked element equals click event dot target. And this is probably a good place to console.log. We'll just write clicked, and then we'll write clicked element. And that'll let us see which element gets clicked. So let's go in here. Okay, so it knows that we're clicking the image. in this case, it knows that we are clicking the animal itself. So slightly different results based on whether I click the image or I click on the actual animal. Okay. So now I need a way to be able to get the ID of the animal and be able to send it off to the server. So we currently don't have the ID on the page, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the ID to the page. So I'm going to go into here and I am going to create a div. And then inside of the div, I will put the ID of the animal. And we're going to cover a way to not have to do this in a minute, but this is where we're starting. So now I have the ID, and when I click that, look what it does. It shows the div, and then inside the div, there's the ID of that animal. So I can actually click 1 or 2, and it does the right thing. Okay. In order to make things a little bit simpler, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give this div a class, and I'm going to call that div animal-number. It's a little bit tricky to click it, so I will go into my style sheet, and I'm going to add some style for animal-number. And the style that I'm going to add is to give it some padding, to give it a background that's blue, to make the color white, and to make the maybe border radius 10 pixels, and to give it a border width of 1 pixel, to give it a border style of solid, and to give it a border color of black. So let's just see what that looks like real quick. Cool. Now I can click these and I get the animal number out. But I don't want the animal number div. What I actually want is just the number inside. So let's see if we can modify our JavaScript code to get just the number. So we'll do let clicked number equal clicked element dot inner text. And then in my thing, I'm going to write just clicked number instead. So if I refresh now and I click, you'll see it just clicked and then the number, which is exactly what I want. Okay, so now I've got the ability to click something, the ability to get a number out of it. Now, all I need still is the ability to take that number and give it to the server, and then have the server tell me what sound the animal makes. And remember here, it says to use JSON. So we're going to try to use JSON. But maybe we'll start without using JSON just to build up to it. Okay, so when we think about having to make a call to the server, what's the immediate thing that comes into our mind is what? Yep, fetch. So we want to make the call to the server, we're going to use fetch. And remember, the way that fetch works is we want to pass the first argument to fetch is what URL to call. And the second argument to fetch is what to do, like what to do when the response comes back. And that's going to be a function. So let's take this fetch and let's move it up here. Now, what will the URL be? We know that it's for animals, so we're going to make /animals/ and then we're just going to take the number and we're going to put it at the end of /animals. So we've taken /animals/ and now we're taking the number and we're putting it right at the end of the animals. So that's going to make a request to /animals/ and then a number. And when it comes back with a response, it's going to call a function called what to do when the response comes back. So we will make that function, which gets a response. Oh, sorry, this I wrote slightly wrong. It should be that, right? So fetch, pass the URL, then you call then, and then this is what happens when the response comes back. Rajesh says, I did not use a div. I added a custom attribute. Yes, that works perfectly fine. We just haven't covered it yet. So we'll be covering it just right after we show how to do it with the pieces that we've covered so far. Okay. So now here we need to be able to do the second part of fetch, which is we call response.json.then, and we say what to do when the JSON comes back. And then that will be another function. That's what to do when the JSON comes back, and it gets in the data that was actually returned. Now we're going to just console.log the data. Okay, so we've called fetch. Then we've received the response and called then on the JSON. Then we're going to just log out the data that comes back. So let's refresh the page and just see what happens so far. We're going to click one of these and says clicked to, so it received the click. And then it tries to make a request to /animals/2. And it says that it gets a 404. It gets an error. Okay, so, and then the next thing it says is this crazy syntax error, unexpected token less than in JSON at position 0. So it seems like whatever it's trying to read is not JSON. And then we think for a second, and then we remember, oh, we didn't even implement the action that returns the sound. So let's go do that. So now we're going back into Ruby, and we have to implement the show action. Now remember, because we're using resources, we already have the show action defined. We just haven't actually typed it yet. So now we're just going to do def show. We don't have to touch our routes file at all. It's already there. And in here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go render plain hello world. So now if I refresh the browser again, I'm going to click my box again. Okay, so no more 404 error, but we actually are getting an error about the JSON still. And it makes sense what it's saying. It's saying, oh, unexpected token H in JSON. Now, why is it saying that error? Well, the reason is because remember, JSON looks like this. It looks like key and then value, right? But the thing it's actually receiving is hello world. So it's like, okay, in order to parse JSON, first I need to see a curly brace, and boom, I don't see a curly brace. I just see the letter H. So what this error is actually saying is, hey, I tried to parse your JSON, but like all I saw is the letter H. So I gave up. And that makes perfect sense because our action is not returning JSON. It's just returning text. So we have to modify it and we have to return JSON. So our JSON has to be some kind of hash. And for now, I'm going to take that hash and I'm just going to make it empty. So this is the data that will get sent back to JavaScript. And if I refresh again and I click the box, now check it out. We're getting a click and then we are getting data, and that data is just the empty hash. So this means we're successfully sending something from Ruby to JavaScript, which is exactly the thing that we need to happen. So rather than have just an empty hash, I'm going to start by loading the animal, which I'll just say animal equals animal find by ID of params ID. Remember, params ID we get for free from the route. And then once we have that animal in our hash, we can just say, oh, the sound of this animal is just animal.sound. So now this hash is going to contain something like this: sound, meow. Okay, so let's click it. Click the first one, it says sound rah rah. Click the second one, sound meow. First one, sound rah rah. Second one, sound meow. So we are not only getting data from Ruby into JavaScript, we're actually secretly getting data from JavaScript into Ruby, because when we send /animals/a number, we're actually sending information to Ruby. We're sending which number animal that we want. Our Reso says, can you explain the difference between JSON and text and when to use which? So you'll only use JSON when you know that the thing that you're getting back is JSON, is structured data. If the thing you're getting back is just plain text, like the word hello or the words hello world, then you'll use text instead. And we're going to see today somewhere else that you use text. Rajesh says, are we always going to use hash to be able to render JSON in show? Yeah, for the most part. For the most part, that's it. Because JSON, you want to be able to return structured data. So that's like a key of maybe there's a bunch of keys that are the type of data that you want, and then there's values. So a hash is the perfect structure to be able to do that with. So while you don't have to use to always use hashes, they are kind of the most convenient thing to use. Manon says, can we get element ID by just clicking on the image? That is the next thing I'm going to do, but yesterday could not have done that because we didn't cover that yet in class. Okay, now we have to deliver on the last part of this, which is that we're supposed to open an alert containing the sound that the animal makes. Okay. Yes, JSON is the standard for RESTful APIs, but again, I'm not going into terms like that. Okay, so currently we're just doing console.log of data. We need to be able to say something like, oh, the sound is actually a certain sound. So let's say that we have a variable called sound. Now, how do we get sound out of data? Well, that's pretty straightforward. We're just going to create a variable called sound, which is just equal to data.sound. Okay, and then instead of sound, I will say the animal says. I can't do an alert because if I do an alert, you won't see it. So I'm just going to do this instead. And it says the animal says rah rah, the animal says meow. I can actually delete my console.log statement here just to make it a little bit clearer what's happening in the logs. So we'll just refresh again. We'll click. Okay. Yep, I'm going to do that in just a second, Andre. See, everybody knows where I'm heading. Rajesh, that's the next thing we're going to do in the class. So I'm not going to go into it now. Okay, I think there was a question about multiple fetches. I'm not going to really talk too much about it, but the idea that you can't put two fetches next to each other because they'll actually happen at the same time. You know, so if you want two fetches that happen in sequence, your inner fetch actually needs to be inside of here. And we can talk about that offline, but I'm not going to go into it now. Okay, so now a lot of people are looking at this and they're remembering yesterday and they're thinking like, okay, but this is like a lot of functions and you got some crazy names in here. You got a function named what to do when the response comes back. Like, just like, stop it, John. This is crazy. You got to simplify this a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the simplification that we did yesterday to kind of drop this down a little bit. And I'm going to show you something that's really cool about doing that. I'm going to show you why you might want to do that. But first, let's get started. So handle click is a function that calls inside of it what to do when the response comes back. So let's just take this function, what to do when the response comes back. I'm going to copy it. And then instead of calling it by name, I'll just drop the definition right in there. So now that I've dropped the definition right in there, instead of referring to it by name, I can actually go and take the original definition and I can just delete it. So now functionally, what I have written here does the exact same thing as the code before. It works the exact same way. And now you might be seeing the fact that we only talk about what to do when the response comes back in one place. So the name doesn't really matter. And because the name doesn't really matter, we can make it anything. We can make it N. We can make it J. And very importantly, we can make it nothing. We actually don't even need to name the function because, again, the name doesn't matter. And this is what we refer to in JavaScript as an anonymous function. It's a function with no name that its only purpose is to be able to be passed to another function as an argument. Okay, so once we do that, there's actually one more thing we can do. If we want to make it just really nice, is we can take the word function and erase it and go after response and use what's called a fat arrow, which is equals greater than. And again, this is a case where if it wasn't so prevalent for people to write JavaScript with this fat arrow, then I wouldn't even show it to you. I would have stopped right there because, of course, this makes more sense. Like, what the hell is an equals greater than sign? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't mean anything. But it's important for you to know because every piece of JavaScript that you're going to see has the other way to write it. So we'll take the function word away and we're going to write equals greater than. Okay, so then once we have done that and we've simplified that, we definitely can go further because we can just do the same operation here. So let's copy it. Actually, let's cut it. Let's take where we had the name before and we'll just paste it right in there. Okay. So now again, this name is only used in one place. We can change it to anything. We can change it to L, P, or we can just change it to nothing. So now we have another anonymous function. And because we're writing it like this, function data, we can do the same thing. We remove the word function and we put it after. I was saying this a bit yesterday, but like, if we didn't give you the background in how this worked, imagine how hard it would be to learn JavaScript. You're just looking at this like, what are all these symbols? Well, it doesn't make any sense. Like there's parentheses everywhere, there's equal signs. It's only through kind of the reduction of how you get there that you're going to understand what all this stuff is doing. Okay, now people are probably getting pretty excited because we can actually do the whole thing one more time. So let's take this function again and let's drop it right in there. We can delete the original. And now handle click does not need to be named anymore. And then once we're here at function, we can drop the word function and replace it with equals greater than. Just go to the page and let's click. And it still works exactly the same way. Yeah, it's great. It's the exact same code. It does the same thing. In this case, it's just, those are the same thing. This is less lines. It's simpler. It's easier to read. It's great. Code, 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 code. Okay. I'm going to show you something that actually is really, really cool. And that's, you may have heard of these anonymous functions talked about as closures. Now, what does that mean? What is a closure? Okay. I'm going to temporarily copy this, and I'm going to go back to what we had before. So I'm going to undo all the changes that we just did. I'm going to show you something to explain to you what a closure is. Okay, and then down here, I'm going to write the new version. Okay, so this is our code before. Now imagine here we had the animal says and then a sound. And imagine what I wanted to do here was not only say the animal says, but I wanted to say the ID of the clicked animal is. Okay, and I wanted to get the ID. So how would I get the ID? Right? Now, if I wanted to get the ID, there's a way that obviously we could do it. We could go into Ruby and we could modify our hash to also contain animal.id. So that's how we could get the ID into JavaScript. Now I'm going to ask you something else even more complicated. What if instead of saying the ID of the animal is, and then the ID, I wanted to turn the element that was clicked pink. Okay, so I'd want to be able to do something like clicked element dot style dot background equals pink, background color. But look, I can't, because here, I want to turn it pink only when the JSON comes back, only when I'm actually saying what animal it is. But look, I can't do that here. I can't take this and modify clicked element. And it's probably obvious why, because I don't have clicked element here. So then you might think, okay, you want to get clicked element in the place that you want it. Why don't you just pass it into the function called what to do when JSON comes back? But even that's really complicated, because I'm not the one calling what to do when JSON comes back. The one calling what to do when JSON comes back is actually the then method. And I don't control the then method. That's just part of JavaScript. So how do I get a reference to the clicked element in the place that I want it? Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do it. And I want you to never write code like this, because then I'm immediately going to show you how to do it the right way. So imagine we out here create a variable called clicked element that doesn't have anything inside of it. Okay, then in our handle click method, what we'll do is, instead of let clicked element defining a new variable, we will just set clicked element equals click event.target. So what we've done by making this simple change is we've actually made it so that now clicked element is accessible from everywhere inside of our program. We've turned it into what effectively is a global variable. You can think of it like this is really saying the last element that was clicked, right? And we're going to use that to set in here. Okay, so now by making that change, what I've done is I've given myself the ability to have a handle on clicked element inside of what to do when JSON comes back. I've essentially elevated my access to the clicked element so that I can access it in all the different methods that I want. Does this make sense? How I've given myself access to the clicked element so it gets set inside of handle click. And then I essentially just pick it up inside of my callback, inside of what to do when JSON comes back, because otherwise there's no way to do this. There's no way for me to pass data from the click handler into then, because I'm not then. I can't pass data that I don't have, and that I'm not the one that wrote then. Do you understand? So when I refresh, let's see what it does. So if I click this, you're going to see that it comes back, and then it actually says the animal says. Looks like it's actually saying it multiple times, which is interesting. We could look into that separately. Oh, it's multiple times because we have both implementations here on the page. So we have this one and the top one. Okay, so anyone that's looking at this right now is probably either very confused or wondering, what is this? Why in JavaScript you have to make a global variable to be able to pass things between functions? This is crazy. Why would you have to? Let me take a step back for the people that are confused, because I don't want to lose people on this. So let me just take a step back on the thing that I just did. Okay, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to change this to let clicked element. Okay, and then this is clicked element. Okay. Rajesh, so there's a quick question, which is why couldn't we have changed the color down here in line 18? And the reason is because what we're trying to do here is we're only trying to change the color once the response comes back from the server, which is not here. So line 18 is the place where we're actually sending the request to the server, but we want to change the color in this case when the response comes back from the server. Okay, so check it out. If I want to make it so that, okay, instead of making the box pink, let's say that what we want to do is we want to change the box so that inside of it, it says what sound the animal makes. So we would want to be able to write something like clicked element dot inner text equals sound. Right? This makes sense. This code hopefully makes sense, which is that we want to be able to change the clicked element to have the inner text sound. Well, let's write that code and let's just refresh the browser and let's go click. And look what it says. It says clicked element is not defined. And that's true because what to do when JSON comes back, the function doesn't have access to clicked element. It's not one of the parameters here. The only thing it has access to is the data that comes back from the server. So then you're probably thinking, well, why don't we just pass clicked element, the function, or sorry, the element into the what to do when JSON comes back. But the problem with that is that we actually can't, because we never call what to do when JSON comes back. Remember, what we do is we actually take the what to do when JSON comes back function, the name of it, and we pass it to the then function. So then is the thing calling what to do when JSON comes back. We can't control what arguments are passed to what to do when JSON comes back. It just only gets the JSON data. That's all it can ever get because that's what then passes it. And we are not in control of how the then function works. So inside of here, we don't have access to what to do. We don't have access to the clicked element. So how could we fix this is we would create an element outside of all of this, and we would call it recently clicked element. And then when you click an element, we get the element, and before we even do anything, we set recently clicked element to the element that got clicked. So now we're essentially taking the element that got clicked, and we're saying, hold on to that in the global scope in a variable called recently clicked element. So every time that we click something, it will update this variable, which there's only one of in your entire application, called recently clicked element. It is going to update that to be the element that was most recently clicked. Okay. And you're thinking, why would you do that? Well, the reason that you would do that is now I have a variable called recently clicked element that actually does contain the element that was most recently clicked. So I can use it. I can say recently clicked element dot inner text equals sound. And now when I go to my view and I click, they work. Okay. Does it, Joe, did that make more sense? It's okay if the answer is no, but hopefully that that clears a little bit up of what I'm doing here. Now, I'm only showing you this to trigger something in you maybe thinks that this is really weird. It's weird that JavaScript doesn't have some way to more cleanly do the thing that we're doing here. And this is the point where I'm going to erase the code that was the old code, and I'm going to bring our new code back. I'm going to show you how we write it in the new code. In the new code, let's try to do the same thing. Clicked element dot inner text equals sound. Now check it out. Even though we're inside of this inner function, we can actually access the things from the outer functions. And this is what's called a closure. This is how a closure works. So if you've ever heard of these anonymous functions referred to as closures, this is what people are talking about. They're talking about the ability to not only have anonymous functions, but actually have anonymous functions that are able to reach into the context of the thing that surrounds them. So these are real functions, but we're still able to access clicked element inside of here. So there's no global variable, there's no anything. We're basically just able to reach into whatever context the function was run in. So if I refresh the browser and I click, you see that it works. Now, there are many people that look at this and they're like, wow, JavaScript's so cool. And I agree with you. I've been there before. It actually is very cool. It's cool that this is possible. But I would challenge people that say that a little bit to think that JavaScript is cool. I think from a maybe this is cool from a theoretical or a hypothetical standpoint, but it is cool because it's technically cool, but there are other ways that other programming languages like Ruby have solved these same problems that don't involve nested functions and closures. So I think like it's cool, but maybe not ideal for people that are getting started in programming, which is why I say that JavaScript is just very confusing language. Okay. Anonymous attendee says closure. Yes. Hopefully I've just explained what a closure is for you. Rajesh says, couldn't we have done, okay, I answered that already. We'll likely need to rewatch this. That's okay. Rajesh says, I'm sorry, but my question still remains the same. Why are we doing the uppermost function instead of changing? I think I've answered your question, but if I haven't, the answer is that we don't want to change the color when you send the request. We want to change the color when the request actually comes back. So we can't do that after fetch, because when you call fetch, fetch happens asynchronously. So if we're doing something down here, let's say I'm going to write after fetch, and then here I'm going to say console.log change color. I think this is what you're asking. And now when I refresh the page, we're going to see that first after fetch fires and then change color fires. So fetch does not stop the flow of the function. It actually just registers what to happen when the result comes back from the server. It's asynchronous. It doesn't happen right in the row. So that's why you can't just do it right there. If you write something after fetch, you're actually not saying things that should happen after fetch is done. You're, I hope that makes sense. There are other ways around that, but I'm not going to teach them. If you're interested, you should look up async await. Yes, Manan, that is part of it. One more time on closure, please. Yeah, so closure is basically our ability to be able to access clicked element, despite the fact that it was never passed into the function that we're currently in. We're accessing it from the outer function. Anonymous attendee says, what about using await? Yeah, I think people keep asking questions like this, like what about using like more advanced feature past the point that we're at? And it's a little, people don't learn to program like that. People don't learn anything like that, I don't think, which is like, people have to learn in bite-sized pieces. You have to get there eventually. So the way that people learn is not, you can't just go straight to the simplest way or the way that is most obvious to you. You have to instead approach the problem through the lens of someone that has not seen this thing before. And if I just go straight to some other concept, then I'll be doing everyone in the class a disservice. So if you know about a topic that you know would be a better option for the thing that I'm doing, I promise you I know what it is. I promise you I know what async await is. I promise you I know how it works. So like you're not going to maybe help me in this case, I think help me because I know that async await exists. I hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to say don't say it, but I think that we need to keep focused, and that if I start going into things like async await, I'm just going to be bringing a lot of people down a road that's just going to make them not end up being programmers. Our Reso says, is fetch executed by the browser? Yes, it is. Manon says async await is sometimes something I struggled with, especially in React. No, we're not going to cover it. We're not going to cover async await. But if you're interested, there are plenty of great articles about it. Also, I hope that I did not upset whoever asked that question. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to keep us on track. Okay. So a question that came up quite a bit in the homework and in the session as I just did it here is, what if you actually wanted to be able to click on any part of the image, right? We're clicking on this like ID here, but what if we wanted to be able to click on the cat, or we want to be able to click on the word cat, or just anywhere inside of the div that contains the cat? How would we do that? And the way that we would do that is we'd have to make a change here. And what we're going to do is, instead of calling target, we're going to call a method in JavaScript called closest. Okay. So when we do this, what we're going to do is we're going to call closest. And for now, what I'm going to do, instead of doing all of the things we do in this method, I'm going to log that element, and then I'll just return so that we don't execute the rest of this. Notice my editor turned it all gray so that it goes away. So now if I click here, now I can click anywhere inside of here. Oh, I broke it. It should be click event.target.closest. Sorry. So I'll go back here. And now I click here. And notice no matter where I click inside of these, I'm getting back the same thing. And now let me hover over one of them. And you'll see that what I'm getting is actually the entire box. It's the animal box, the class.animal. Okay. Is everyone seeing what this does? So what closest does, maybe we can even see documentation. No, we can't. What closest does is it says, go to the closest element to this element, going up the hierarchy of things inside of the HTML until you find something called .animal. So just to take a quick look at our index.html file, if a click happens here, then what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, I'm not a .animal. Then it's going to go, boop, are you a .animal? It's going to say, no, I'm not a .animal. And then it's going to go, boop, are you a .animal? And it's going to say, yup. And then that's the element that will come back. Same thing for this. If you click the image, it's going to say, well, I don't have the class .animal. And then it's going to go to its parent and it's going to say, do you have the class .animal? And the answer is yes. So it returns the animal. So now we actually have the ability to grab always a box called animal using closest. Okay. But there is a problem, just like there's always a problem, which is that if I try to comment back in all of these other things, let's follow what happens. So the first thing that happens right after that is that we use clicked element.innerText to be able to get the number. Well, let's change our console.log to say clicked number, and we'll just output the clicked number. And then we'll also just return so that we don't end up doing anything else. Okay, so let's click and see what happens. Okay, so now what it's saying is that the clicked number is actually the word aardvark, and then a new line, and then the number 2. So it's putting aardvark 2. Now, the number is somewhere in there, but like, how are we going to get the number out of there? The way that we can get the number out, the simplest way, and I'm going to show you a couple ways, like I said, the simplest way is to use the inverse of closest. And the inverse of closest is called find. So I'm going to create a variable called number element, and I will do clicked element dot find, And in this case, we want animal number, which remember is that inner box. We look at our HTML as we have an animal div here. And then inside of it, we have another div called animal number, which holds the number. Okay. And once we have the number element, we can say clicked number is actually equal to the number elements inner text. So instead of it being the clicked elements inner text, it's the number elements inner text. Let's run it again. I'm going to click element.find is not a function. Oh no, now I did it. Oh, sorry, not find. Query selector is the thing we want. So just like we were able to call query selector on the document, we want to now be able to say query selector on the element. So query selector is only inside of this element do I want to find things. So it's a query selector that instead of running on the entire page, runs only on the element that it was called on. I get confused sometimes between multiple languages. So clicked element query selector. So let's refresh and let's click. And now you see on the right-hand side, it says click number, and then it just has the number. So we're back to where we were before. We can actually go remove the return, and we should be able to have our function, the rest of our function continue to work how it was. Oh no. Okay, so what happened? What happened here was that we clicked and the entire thing was actually replaced with just the word rah rah. Let's take a look at our code and figure out why that happened. So we keep stepping through, we get the number, then we go fetch the sound, then we get the JSON, we get the sound out of the JSON, we output to the console, and then what do? We do clicked element.innerText equals sound. And that is our bug. Our bug is that before we were replacing just the thing that was clicked, which was always the number element. Now we're replacing the clicked element, which means we're actually saying, delete everything inside of this element. Remember, the HTML looks like this. So we're saying delete everything inside of it and replace it with just the sound. Of course, that's not the behavior that we want, but we can fix it by just changing clicked element to number element. Refresh one more time. Now when we click, it goes back to our original behavior. Okay. Yep, it's because the whole div is the target. So clicked element is the clicked event.target.closest animal. So clicked element here is the entire containing animal div. It's no longer the number that was clicked, because remember, we can click anywhere inside of here. So we have two variables now. We have clicked element, which represents the entire animal box, and we have number element, which represents just the inner number. So now the other question that was asked before is like, cool, John, great app, but like I go to web apps all the time and like there aren't just numbers hanging out in the middle of the page. So how do we get rid of the numbers? So the way that we get rid of the numbers is we actually put them somewhere hidden on the page. So there's actually many ways we can do this. So the simplest way is we could go to animal number. We could go into our animals CSS file, and we could just say, this is actually display : none. So that will just make it so that the numbers are hidden. And now when I click them, nothing says meow because we've hidden the entire element. Okay, so if we wanted it to say meow, we just have to figure out where we want to put the meow on the page. So let's go make that change. So we've hidden the animal number. We've essentially just taken it off the page, but it is still there. If I actually inspect the page, inside of the animal, there's the animal number here. It's just hidden. I can toggle it on and off. You can see it's still there. It's just invisible. So it's only there so that I can get the number out. Okay. So now I want to be able to put the meow somewhere, and the We actually don't even need to put it anywhere because the goal of the exercise was to put it in the alert, and that's what we're doing. So we're just going to stop there for that. I'm not going to try to put it somewhere else. Okay. So now you might be wondering, I'm going to remove the thing because it's not doing anything. Now you might be wondering, is that really how you write JavaScript code? You create like a bunch of hidden elements on the page that contain the IDs? And the answer again is no. The actual way that you do it is with a thing called HTML attributes. So when we do class equals, we actually can put other things here too. We can put other tags, and they can be anything. They can be name equals John, or they can be hat equals black. And the way that you get these attributes is you go into your JavaScript, and let's just try outputting console.log hat. And what we'll do is clicked element, which is actually not a great name anymore. It should be, maybe that's confusing people. It should be called like animals element, but clicked element dot get attribute hat. So get attribute is a JavaScript method that you can call on any element that will get you the value of any attribute. In this case, the attribute is called hat. So let's refresh. Let's click, and look, we get hat black. Okay. So if we can write something like hat equals black, then there's not much stopping us from writing animal number equals animal ID. Okay, and once I write animal number in there, and we'll even call it animal number attribute just for now, animal number attribute. Let's try to get the animal number out in JavaScript. Well, we know how to get the hat attribute out. So let's just modify that to be animal number attribute. And then for here, I'm just going to write animal number. So let's refresh and click. And now look, we have animal number 2. So we're successfully getting the ID out of an attribute. We're so close now because now we can just put animal number into a variable. And now because we have animal number, we don't need to get the number the way that we were before. So our browser is actually going to help us with this. Let's rename animal number to clicked number, or actually we'll keep it animal number. We're going to go to all the places where we used clicked number before, and we'll replace them with animal number. Okay. And now look what our editor's done. It's turned clicked number gray. And it's saying that it's declared, but the value is never used. And of course, that's right, because we just stopped using it. So what I can do, because I'm never using it, is I can just delete this line. And then when I do that, number element also turns gray. And it's saying, oh, now that you're not getting number or click number anymore, you're not using number element anymore because we were only using it to get the number out. So now I can delete number element as well. And then because I deleted animal number and because I'm technically hiding the entire thing, I can just delete all of the CSS and I can delete this div, which was only there to get the number out. So let's do that. So we refresh the page, click, and look what it says. The animal says rah rah, and it knows what number was clicked, and the animal says meow. Yeah. Okay, now we're one single, very small step away from the way that you would actually write this code in a real application. And it's just the naming instead of this being called animal number attribute, the typical way that you would name this is starts with data dash, and then you don't have to write the word attribute at the end. So the normal name that you would use is data animal number. Data dash is always the prefix of these custom things, data dash, and that's just a convention that's used. So all we have to do is go to our JavaScript and use the same name, just data animal number. And now we refresh just to make sure that it still works. And since we just changed the name, it didn't. Oh, sorry, it still works. Okay. Rajesh says, I tried filtering for click event using .tag name. So tag name is not a method. It is you're trying to call a method called tag name, but tag name is just a property. So you want to actually, if you're going to filter with tag name, you actually, that's not how it would work. Instead, what you would do is you would do tag name equals div. And if you're interested in more details about that, check out yesterday. And then Rajesh says on line 3 in index.html.erb, when I didn't put the empty quotes around the attribute name, it didn't work. Yeah, you need these quotes around the value. Also, when fetching the attribute, doesn't it get converted to a string instead of a number? Yep, it does. Yeah, so that's a good point, is that when JavaScript reads these, they don't come through as numbers, because remember, if I look at the actual HTML of the page and I go in here, look what it's showing as data-animal-number equals 2. So even though we're saying it's a number, there's nothing for JavaScript to know it's a number. It just gets it as a string. So when these things go into JavaScript, they're just always strings. But actually, in this case, that's totally fine because we want it to be a string. We're getting a string that is essentially a string that contains just 2. And then it's a string. So we can just append it to another string, /animals/2. Okay. So now we got get attribute. Okay, next I'm going to show you how to get HTML from the server instead of getting just JSON. JSON's cool. JSON gets you a lot, gets you structured data, but sometimes you want to send an entire thing back. So imagine what we wanted to do here instead is we wanted to be able to put just the names and have it so that when you click the name, it shows the image of the aardvark. Okay, so let's make a modification to our server HTML to make that work. So the name wrapper is going to stay the exact same as it was before. But remember, what we're going to do is we're going to delete the image for now. So I'm going to take the image away. I'm going to take the image away. And because I want it to be something that you can click, I'm going to put a box around these animal names just so that they're separated. So I can remove this CSS, but I'll just keep it there for now. And we're going to add CSS for .animal. On CSS, I want to say that it has a border that is 1 pixel solid black border. And then I want to say that there's a padding of 10 pixels. And this is just a short way of saying it's a 1 pixel border, border style solid, and the border color is black. So I'm going to do that. And maybe I'll give them a little bit of spacing around themselves also. So let's do that. And now we got the spacing. And what we want is when you click them, we want to go download from the server some HTML that includes the image and the sound that the animal makes. You can see that the click still works. It still does the right thing and says the animal says meow. But we want more. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to our controller, and instead of rendering JSON, we're going to render some actual HTML. Okay. So I'm going to take away the hash and the render JSON call. And then because we're rendering a real normal view, now animal has to be at animal so that we can access it over in the view. Okay. And then if we go over to our views directory, we want to create a new file called show.html.erb. And this is going to say something like showing the information about animal name. So let's refresh and let's click. Okay, and it does that thing again. It says unexpected token less than in JSON at position 0. Now, the fact that it's saying in JSON maybe gives you a hint as to what's happening here. And what's happening is that in JSON is trying to parse the HTML that is coming back to it as JSON. So let's look at our network tab and we can see more clearly what's happening. So this is the actual call. Click into it. We can see this is what the server sent back. It sent all of this stuff. So the reason that it can't parse it as JSON is because when it gets to the first character, it sees a less than sign and it's like, what does less than mean in JSON? That's not JSON. It doesn't make any sense. So then it raises an error and it says this error, which essentially means I don't think the thing you sent back is JSON when it's saying unexpected token less than in JSON at position 0. So we can fix that. We learned it already, how to fix it. We're just going to take the thing that we're writing and instead of JSON, we're just going to write text instead. So hopefully this answers, I don't remember who it was, but answers your question about when you would use text. I think it might have been Rubina, or, but if I got that wrong, I'm sorry. Okay, so let's go in here and now let's click again. And now what it says is it says the animal says undefined. Okay, and the reason it says the animal says undefined is because of this, which we haven't changed yet. So currently it's supposed to say the animal says and then the sound, but our code here is assuming that we are getting in now a JSON hash that contains a key called sound, but we removed all the JSON. So that's not what we're getting anymore. What we're getting now is we're getting some text. So we're going to take the text that we get in. We will no longer be able to pull the sound out of it because that's not a thing anymore. And we'll just put the text inside of the console.log statement. Okay. And let's click one. And it says, oh, cool. Look, it's HTML. It says the animal says, and then it's got all of the HTML file. Okay. So this is pretty neat. We're able to make an AJAX request and get back HTML. So now all we have to do is we have to put the HTML inside of the box. We have the box, we have the HTML. Let's get started and let's do it. So the box is just the clicked element. And we're going to say that the inner text is the text. And I'm going to remove the next line. Just remove the console.log because it's going to be kind of noisy. Let's refresh and let's click it. Oh, definitely not what we wanted. So when we use text, it's giving back HTML. But then when we put the HTML actually on the page, it's going and doing this. It's going and putting the literal HTML in the box. Well, that's not what we want at all. Let's try it on cat. HTML again. Okay, so how do we fix it? It is just a very simple change. And we need to be able to tell JavaScript that the thing that we're putting into the element is HTML. So instead of writing inner text, we're going to write inner HTML. and we refresh and click and look. Now it says showing the information about aardvark. It's not showing it as HTML anymore. Now it's showing the thing that's actually there. Well, now we can just go crazy and we can go back to our show view and we can put whatever we want in here. So let's go in here and let's put our image tag for the animal image URL. And we can even write the animal says animal.sound. Let's refresh again, click it. Come on, it's really cool because you're making a call to the server, you're getting back an entire piece of HTML and you're putting it right into the page. This is how pages are built. Modern web apps, some are built in React, but the ones that aren't are built using this, which is called XHR. It's a form of AJAX that stands for XML HTTP request. And it's a way to get full HTML from the server to the page without reloading the page. Now, someone in the comments here has asked me, Aloyson has asked me to inspect the animal div. And I'm very glad that you did, because let's look at the animal div. So now we've got the animal div here, but then look inside of it. It's got the title. It's got some like meta tags. It's got another link to the style sheet. It's got a JavaScript tag. And then it has the things we actually care about. We don't want all that stuff in there. It's the entire page essentially rendered inside of the page. And that makes sense that it is. And the reason it makes sense is because if I go to /animals/2, this page needs to have all of the HTML. So how can we tell Rails that this route, the one that is /animals/2, is not meant to go to, but instead meant to be embedded in another page? The way that we can do that is we go to the controller, and when we say render show, we can pass a second argument called layout false. So now if I refresh the page and I click and I inspect, you'll see that it only contains the information that was from the partial, from the template. So layout false is a way to say, only render the view, don't render all the other stuff around the view. And that's important because you don't want to have to render the entire page inside of the other page. It's really, really very, very neat. We've put an ID onto a div that contains one piece of information. Then we've used that div and that ID on click to be able to send a request to a server that renders more HTML, which we then put inside the box. And there's just so much more that JavaScript can do. This is kind of the end of our introduction to JavaScript, but I want to just point you in a few more directions. JavaScript can react to other things other than clicks. You can do things like on mouse over, or you can do things, other things regarding loading data. You can fetch data from other sites. You can have iframes. You can use visualization libraries like D3. You can use other front-end libraries like React if they're interesting to you. Now those doors are open because you know JavaScript. You need to know JavaScript in order to know React. JavaScript is very important, like Ernest is saying. It's very important to know JavaScript. But if you think that front-end development is for you, those are the things that you want to look into. You want to go look into React or Angular or Vue.js, maybe a charting library like Raphael or D3, visualization libraries. There's just so much you can do with JavaScript. Like if we even go to D3, so it is a library for manipulating documents based on data. So any one of these is an example of someone using D3. This actual behavior here, if you saw those moving, is actually just powered by the JavaScript on the bottom. Okay. So like I was saying, let me go back to back to the thing I was saying, which is that there's so much more to JavaScript. There are all these visualization libraries that you could check out. And if you're interested in more JavaScript, just like there's an entire world of JavaScript out there that you can get into. Just like anything, everything in computers has an entire world of that thing. Anything in programming is just like its own little universe. So, well, not little, they're big universes. Let's go over the homework between today and tomorrow. And then I will figure out what I'm going to do about what just happened. Okay. So here we go. This is the homework for session 15. You're going to create a guestbook model that has a name. Also, if you asked the question before and we lost the question, please ask the question again, and I will spend the time like I always do to answer the question. So, okay. So yeah, I'm thinking maybe it is somewhere. I will look for it before I end up re-recording the whole thing. So create a guestbook model that has a name. Then you are going to create a guestbook model or a guestbook entry model that has a guestbook ID, a person name, and a body. So guestbook entry belongs to guestbook. In exercise 2, I want you to create an index view that lists all of the guestbooks and create a show view, which is linked from that index view, that shows you all of the messages in an individual guestbook. In exercise 3, we'll move the list of messages into a separate action. And I want you to refresh it every 3 seconds via JavaScript. So instead of the page reloading, only reload the list of messages. So that's going to use something like the XHR that we looked at before. And the way that you will do the refreshing is like kip checkout set interval. So you'll look up the documentation for set interval and you'll be able to do this. And then exercise 4, which is a bonus, is if you'd like to implement a form that allows you to add a new entry to the guestbook in a separate browser. And then as a note, when you add a guestbook entry, it should automatically show up in both browsers. So this is the homework. Olowason says, did we lose the recording? I really hope not, because we've gone so far and recorded like 40 hours of material, but it is possible and I will try to get it back. And if I can't get it back, then I will sit here and record 2 hours of the same session. And then Rajesh says, what would be the difference between rendering the entire page and then just the view? Yeah, so the difference is some of the examples, because we have a limited amount of time between individual sessions, can be a little bit contrived, meaning that they may not seem the most useful. But one advantage, for example, in this is that the new message comes in and just like shows up in the chat without the user having to take any action. So it's automatically refreshing. So it's different. That wouldn't happen if it was just on the page. Rajesh says, in a separate browser, what does that mean, or how is that achievable? So yeah, you'd have 2 browsers like Chrome or Safari, Firefox, Internet Explorer. That would allow you to be able to log in twice. If you don't feel like using 2 browsers, you can just log in inside of an incognito session in your existing browser, and that would let you be able to do the same thing. So you'd be able to have one session that was incognito and one session that was regular. Adnan says, John, I have a screen recording. It would suggest that I upload it to YouTube. Are you okay with that? Instead of uploading it to YouTube, if you could put it on somewhere like Dropbox, then I will be able to bring it down and I will be able to hopefully do something with it to be able to use it. And that would really, really save me a lot of time. I didn't know anyone was recording, but if that recording can save me having to re-record the entire session, then I will be very, very appreciative of that. Rajesh says, .tag name, my computer does this. I'm surprised it hasn't done it before. Thank you, Adnan. WeTransfer is totally fine. Dot tag name equals class name didn't work. Yes, because dot tag name is only the name of the tag. So it's only going to work with div. It won't work with the class name part. So if you wanted to do that with dot tag name, you would actually have to check the tag name and then separately check whether or not the class name was the same as the thing that you're trying to check. Rajesh says this was dismissed, so putting it again, if we have to find something in app layout, that would be rendered in this or only the view. So it would be rendered there, but we actually got around that by using layout : false, and that got rid of it. Someone in the chat here says, what OS do you use? It looks like Manon. So I'm using Mac OS just because that's what we use for the work laptop. My personal computer is a Linux desktop, but I don't really have much use for it these days because I just pretty much do everything on this laptop instead. So Mac OS is the answer. I will accept any file version that you have. An MP4 is probably the best. I appreciate that people are recording them, by the way. It's something I would never think to do, but now that you're doing it, you can save me some time. I really appreciate that. Rajesh says, are you going to review session 14 now? No, I review the homework at the beginning of the course. So session 14 was reviewed at the start of the course. Felipe, take your time. I know it takes me at least like 45 minutes to have it fully processed as well. So I'll see if I can find it too. If I can find it. Yeah. Cole says, Rajesh, you might try class name equals class name. Yep, that's right. That's exactly what you want to do. You just don't want to include the dot. So just like Cole is written here, you'd want to be able to check the class name with the triples equals, and then just the class name inside of single quotes or double quotes. So tomorrow, just to give an outline of kind of like what's going to happen tomorrow, there are a couple things that I want to cover that are technical. So for example, I would like to go over how to use a gem. I wanted to be able to cover that today, but I ran out of time. I'd also like to be able to cover how to use JavaScript package. So that's very similar to gems, but in JavaScript. I would like to be able to cover how to upload your app to Heroku. And then lastly, I'm going to spend some time talking about the requirements for the final project. So get excited because it's our last I guess synchronous time together. But I'm hopeful. It sounds like people are really getting along in like the study sessions and everything. So I'm hopeful that communication in the chat and communication in the class continues beyond me doing the lessons. Anonymous attendee says, if we're an exercise or two behind, can we still ask for feedback up to a few days after the last class? Yes, please. Yes, send me. If you're interested in getting feedback, there are two ways that I think primarily people can make sure they did a good job on something. The first way is to watch the next lecture and see how I did it and compare what I did to what you did. If that is not sufficient, then feel free to message me and I will I'll review it myself and I'll give you feedback. I've done that for a lot of people in the class. I hopefully people are feeling the love a little bit. Like I've spent a lot of time reviewing individual submissions. Manon says, you still have to talk about your 3-car garage before the class ends. Yeah, I could talk about my shop. I should do the final lesson like from the shop or something, but I can also just send out some photos on the emails about the shop. Oh yeah, I think what Manon is also saying is my ideal 3 cars. You have to have a pickup truck, and it would have to be a big one because you want to be able to use it for pickup truck type things. So that'd be like a Silverado 2500 or 3500 because I like Chevys. Then you'd have to have something fast. So I would probably go with something fast. I'd probably say like, I don't really like Tesla just because I think they're like a little overhyped, but realistically probably get a Tesla because it's fast and it can drive itself and the technology is cool. And then the third car, I would want to be some kind of like, I would have to pick something that could work for my family because so you need like practical, fast, and work. So I'm thinking about this like to break it down into groups. So you got a van, like a minivan, and then you got a speed car like Tesla, and then you got a work truck. That's my 3-car garage. Sewell says, can't appreciate you enough. I appreciate you. I appreciate you for being here. Anonymous attendee says, is it normal that I find JavaScript much less clear compared to Ruby on Rails? No, I think that is definitely normal. I do think it'll eventually click for you, but I think also if it doesn't, it's not super important. There are plenty of people that have a kind of cursory knowledge of how JavaScript works without getting too deep, kind of like in the weeds of how it works. You don't need to be an expert in everything. I think like, was it B. Dougie yesterday was saying that you don't need to be an expert. When you're a junior engineer, a lot of times it's people think they have to know about all the things. Like when we were talking about async await before, you don't have to know all the things. What you have to know instead is you have to know one set of things that is the thing you're going to do, and you have to know it pretty deep, but then you have to also know that the other things exist. So know that JavaScript exists, know generally how to read it. A lot of Ruby developers don't know how to write it. So hope that helps. Please recommend a JavaScript book to buy. Let me see. There's a book by a person named Douglas Crockford, and he makes a book called JavaScript, The Good Parts. If you're interested in digging deeper into pure JavaScript as a language, then JavaScript, The Good Parts, while I don't have much to say about Douglas Crockford, the book is good. So I would check out that book. And then if you're interested in something like React or a front-end framework, I would find a book that is particularly about that topic. Yeah, there's some recommendations for books that are free for online copies as well. So I would check those out if you're interested. Anonymous attendee says, I already have a bit of JavaScript and React experience. Can I do my project using that? We'll talk more about the project tomorrow. But the goal is that the project is going to incorporate all the things that I've taught. So Ruby, Rails, JavaScript, CSS. Madan says, Jen Schiffer was talking about small snippets of code on her Twitter today. Really agreed with her on how small blocks of code are important and give confidence to newbies when they work. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. When I'm saying like slowly work through your solution until you get to a working answer, like solve one problem at a time. That's really what I'm saying is like, when I say first set up your view and just render something so that you can make sure the view is rendered correctly, then move to the next problem. That's what engineers do. They break the problems down into small chunks. And those small chunks, hopefully, are things that they can solve individually. So you need to find a way to break the problem down. Just solve one little tiny piece at a time. Tomorrow, we'll also talk about testing a little bit. So testing is a way to kind of verify things are working as you go, although there are limits to that. So think about when someone's like building a bridge, they want to be able to go from here to there. They're an engineer. They want to be able to design and build a bridge. They don't start by saying like, step one, build the bridge. Step one, just like put a bridge there. What they do is they say, well, okay, the first step is that we need to be able to figure out what type of bridge we're going to build. So they decide on the type of bridge. They maybe go through all the different pieces. And then they say, okay, now we can forget about that entire discussion. We don't even need to talk about what type of bridge we're building anymore. Now we're going to focus on what is the bridge built out of. And then once they decide that, they can forget that entire topic. So they're essentially narrowing. Every single decision they make is narrowing toward the solution that they're going to end up implementing. And that's what you're doing when you're slowly putting together code, is you're essentially saying, well, now that I can render something when you go to a certain URL and I can render a piece of code, I don't even have to worry about that problem anymore. That problem is done. Now I can focus on what happens inside of the index action. And then maybe you get something from the database. You can prove that you got it from the database. And then you say, I don't have to worry about that part anymore. Database is over. Now all I have to worry about is how the view actually looks. That's the way that you develop software. Rajesh says, is it possible to get a recommendation from you based on how I/we have performed up until now? if you've completed the course exercise, but not the final project for some reason. I talked about this a bit yesterday, but the goal is for you to complete the final project. If you don't go through the final project, I will likely not be able to make a recommendation just because I want to focus all of my energy on the people that are putting in the work to complete the final project. That doesn't rule out like some future recommendation, but definitely not as part of this course, just because I want to focus the energy on the people that are doing the work. Rajesh says, the reason I asked is because I kind am wanting to include that in my resume. I think that regardless of whether or not I recommend anything that you've done, if you are sitting in this room right now, you've completed this course. So I think you can put it on your resume either way. You know, there is no certification at the end. So like, if you're looking to check a box that says that you've completed the course, then check that box. You've completed the course. We're at the end. There's one session left. But if you want me to put in my energy to hopefully connect you with some employers that might give you some interviews, then I can only do that for people that do the final project. Rubina says, is the interview more about how you would solve a scenario or more about concepts of skills involved? So I think you're talking about tech interviews in general, and they're mixed. Some companies have interviews that are very much about like solve a particular problem, and then some are more like have interviews that are more like, here's a scenario and what would you do in this scenario. It really depends on the level, the type of role that you're applying for, and what company you're applying at. Cole says, if someone was interested in React and Ruby, is that Redwood Ruby React thing that Brian was talking about the way to go? Yes, I would definitely invest some time in looking at that. React and Ruby are very commonly used together, so definitely a way to go look at. And React is just like Rails is its a whole thing. React is a whole thing too. If you're interested in that piece, I believe it is redwoodjs.com. So drop a link in here too. So you would want, I think, Redwood plus Rails. I haven't personally looked too much into it, so I don't know the specifics, but I would start, if I were anyone in here, what I would start with is starting by just looking at React tutorials directly if you're interested in front-end development. Don't jump straight to like React plus Redwood, Prisma, GraphQL. Don't jump straight there. Just start with React. Andre says, there's the thing that to prepare for interview in FANG, which is an acronym that stands for, I think it's Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, which is like kind of the biggest tech companies. It's beneficial to grind on leak code and solve as many problems as humanly possible. Would you agree? I don't think I would agree for a junior developer position, but I do think that it would be helpful for you to go through some exercises because a lot of FANG companies, big tech companies like that, are very competitive as far as their hiring practices. And because they're very competitive, that also means that their interviews are hard. So if you're looking to get a job with one of those companies, then probably realistically, there is more work that you have to do on spending time solving algorithmic type problems, because that's probably what they're going to ask you. Another thing that you can do is you can Google something like junior engineer Google interview questions. And you might not get the questions that you're going to get asked. You probably won't, but you will get an idea of the type of questions that Google would ask you in an interview as a junior engineer. There are a lot of resources out there. Glassdoor has a lot of information, but there's also a lot of people that have gone through the interviews and written blog posts about their experiences. Felipe says, is it okay dedicating 7 days after tomorrow to review the videos and exercises, or do it the first time? and the 2 weeks later to do the actual final work. We'll talk more about it tomorrow, but that sounds reasonable to me. Rubina says, was looking through requirements on Dice Monster. All of them need at least 2 years of experience in Ruby on Rails. Any advice how to go about it? You need an entry-level junior engineering position. So it sounds like the things you're finding on Dice and Monster are just not those types of positions. So I would say, well, I've gave you 2 tips. One is like, try to find jobs that are actually entry level. Entry level doesn't mean 2 years of experience. It means, I guess, down to 0 of experience. And then the second advice I would give you is to ignore the 2 years of experience requirement and just apply for the job anyway. I think that's something people miss a lot, is like the requirements in a job post are not, they're not actually requirements. They're just like a list of things that the person wants in an ideal candidate that they're going to hire. If you come in and you're a good programmer and you have no years of experience, but you went through a boot camp, they're still going to talk to you. Or if they don't, that's fine. You can just apply somewhere. And if they screen you out and don't want to talk to you, you can apply later. You can just keep going. You don't have to do that. I find that especially, I don't like to make generalizations, but I do find that especially this is a difference between people from underrepresented backgrounds, especially women, that they see things on a requirement for a job listing, and they think that those things are like, that you actually need them. And then there are a bunch of other junior engineers that are like white males or whatever, and they're just like, bam, 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 there's no rules for me. And they just ignore the requirements and apply for the job, and then they get hired. And that fucking sucks, you know? So because that sucks, you can write the system by just applying for the job anyway, and understanding that there are other people out there that are just ignoring the requirements. So if they're going to ignore the requirements, then I don't know, why shouldn't you? Yes, they also do get paid more. It's true. Ernest says, will we get the final project description tomorrow? Yes, you will. And Rubina says, that helps. Thank you. Yeah, anytime. We can talk more about it anytime you want. Ernest says, finding an entry-level software engineering job is difficult. Do companies hire junior developers nowadays? Yes, they do. Typically, larger companies have the ability to hire junior developers, and also smaller companies. So I would say the people who don't hire junior developers typically are the companies in between. So small companies do it because they can't hire a more senior engineer, because senior engineers don't want to work at a company that was just like founded by someone and has no money. And big companies do it because they're playing the long game. They're trying to bring in junior engineers and train them so that they can get essentially engineers that are indoctrinated in how they work from day one. So those are the 2 types of companies that are typically hiring junior engineers. The middle companies are just so concerned about like even surviving that they're not thinking about how to grow their engineering organization. They're kind of saving that problem for later. So they're less likely to have a junior engineering program. If you ever watched the movie, I think it was called Internship, The Interns. I don't know. It's Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn. It's a funny movie, and they're at Google and they're joining a Google intern class. So that program where they do with like the stupid spinny hat thing, that's a real thing. That actually happens at Google. That's not a joke. So what's cool about that though is that it's actually not just for interns either. They do the same thing for junior engineers. So when you're a junior engineer joining a company like this, a lot of times it can feel like an internship where you are, you know, you're starting, you're not getting anyone coffee or anything. It's not that kind of internship. You're coding. But what I mean is that they're having classes to train you up. They're having social functions to like get you all used to working as a group. They're putting you in situations that'll help challenge you. Big companies have a lot of resources for junior engineering teams. And kind of side note, everyone's wanting to get a job. An internship is a job. You know, like if an internship is paying you, it's giving you experience, and it's giving you income. Internships pay a lot of money in a lot of cases. So even if you're going to go get an internship at a large tech company that has a junior internship program, which most do, even Genius, which was only, I think, 60 people when I worked there, we had internship programs. So you have intern program, they get paid. So yeah, a lot of times they call it an apprenticeship program instead of an intern program. Also, a lot of internship programs, we think of them as like something you do in college or something, but a lot of internship programs actually are aimed at full-time positions that are post-grad. So it's just a way for them to essentially try out an employee without making them an offer. Felipe says, what about starting as a freelancer? Sure, you can do that. Yeah, if you're interested in freelance work. It can be a little bit harder because if you're having like an off day or you don't know how to figure something out, there's less people to ask. But if I would say it would be hard to start as a junior developer, but if you're interested in doing that, you can definitely do it. Anonymous attendee says, as a woman switching industries with a total of 15 plus years experience, I've learned to apply if I fit 20 to 25% of the job requirements. Yeah, that's where you got to be. If you ever have read an interview and there are certain things that you read it and you're like, well, I really would like this job. This job sounds like exactly the type of thing that I want to do, but it says here that you need experience in machine learning as one of the requirements, in addition to being able to program in Ruby. It's like, you got a couple options. Just like, you don't have to lie and say you have machine learning. You just have to put your resume in, and then they're going to go through the resumes, and there's going to be a bunch of other resumes in there that also don't have machine learning experience. And then they're going to interview you, and they're going to have your resume in front of them that says that you don't have it. They're going to ask you, and you're going to say, no, but I'm a fast learner. And then it will likely be okay. But the lesson is don't listen to what it says on the listing. Now, if you have none of the things, listen to that. If you're applying for a position and it says like you need a doctorate and you need 15 years of experience and you need to have architecture experience on large fast apps or something, that probably is too much. But 20 to 25%, that's probably right. It's crazy. And it's unfair that we're giving essentially shots at jobs. I mean, this is people's lives. They're applying for jobs, and we're essentially predicating a lot of times people getting jobs on, we're like rewarding the people that are willing to ignore the description. It's wrong, but it is how it works. We'll fix how it works later, but in the meantime, you have to learn to work in the system. Adnan says, what would a realistic expectation of pay for entry-level candidate in the Northeast United States? Adnan, it's going to amaze you, but I'm pretty sure that like 100K is like kind of the minimum. So it's a lot of money. It's funny, like I got my first programming internship, and this was before I even had a real job. And my internship paid, if you turned the money that I got from the internship into a salary, because I was there for I think a year and a half, I got more money in my internship than both of my parents combined, which is ridiculous. So they worked in the post office. One was a postmaster, one was a clerk at the post office. They worked every day for 40 or 50 years in the post office, and well, probably less than that, 30 or 40 years. And then their son got an internship that paid more money than both of them. And like, it's crazy. But the world needs a lot of programmers. That's a good attitude, Isaiah. If you're saying, yeah, I'm going to help my mom one day. Yeah, that's a good attitude. So less thinking like, hey, I've surpassed you, more thinking, hey, now I can help you. Ernest says, observation, it appears as a Rails developer, you're limited to Shopify, GitHub, or Basecamp. I see Shopify hiring all the time. I disagree with that, that statement, because there are a lot of other Rails companies that you just haven't listed there. But yeah, Shopify does hire all the time. GitHub hires all the time. So even if you just stay within that set of companies, there are still jobs. Also, like, you don't have to take, if you find an entry-level job that's going to be coding PHP, that's not out of reach for you. We just learned Ruby and Rails in 16 days. We learned JavaScript in there too. When we learned JavaScript, we had a functional knowledge of JavaScript after a day. So that is to say that even something like has experience in PHP as a requirement on a job description doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what language you can code in. It just matters that you have the foundational concept of what code is and how it works. I'm telling you, like, if you find a job in PHP, like, you can learn it in a week, 100%. I'm not going to show the list of companies. I don't want anyone to be doing the project based on, what they think they're getting or where they think they'll apply. I think it's maybe a short-sighted view. But if you get to the end, I'll do my best for you. Adnan says, what? I was expecting 60 to 75. Yeah, programmers are overpaid. Well, maybe, I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, it's been this way for a long time, so maybe they're not overpaid. It's just that that's what the market rate is. Adnan says, if we don't have a portfolio site, but we have this project and other things, we'll be ready to apply for jobs. Yeah, I think if you went through this boot camp and you have the project that you do at the end as part of your resume that's sitting on your GitHub for other people to see, that's going to put you in a good state. I don't know if it guarantees that you're going to get a job, but it does mean that you're going to be set up to at least start talking to people. And I can also help you with your resume. Rubina says, John, you actually held our hands and taught us how to take baby steps and finally walk. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate everyone that is here and is doing the course. Anonymous attendee says, need your take on this. Would you suggest leaving a job that I don't like, just testing job, in order to get into dev roles or try alongside? Why don't you just start applying for other jobs? I don't know, like, instead of having to leave one and then having to go find a different one, just go apply for a different one. And then when you get it, you can leave the testing role. Anonymous attendee says, for the homework exercise, shall we use nested resources? I think that would make it easiest. Nested resources will be the easiest way to solve the problem. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. So there'll be a guestbook resources and then a guestbook entries resources nested inside. Lynn says, what's your experience on the course, Ben? Would you do it again? What did you like about it? And what would you change? Oh, man. This is a great question. It has been, it's a lot of work, obviously, to run the course. It's been amazing to have people. When I first started it, I was like, what if no one shows up? Like, what if no one wants to do the course? And then we had something like 400 original applicants come in and say that they wanted to do the course, which is overwhelming. But it also means that I could help more people and that the course could help more people. So I guess my overall take is that while it's been a ton of work, it's been worth it every step, because I know that it's helping people. I know that it's changing people's lives for the better. So I'm happy to be here. And I guess, like, would I do it again? I don't know how long it'll be till I do it again, but I'm thinking about a couple of ways to do it again. One way is to do more of this same course with these same people. One way is to do the exact same course that I did, but start over with a new batch and do the exact same course again. And then the third way would be to not do the course myself, but provide the curriculum to other people so that they can recreate the course in your local communities, maybe even one of you. Andre says, would you want your kids to be developers? As they say, in the future, there will be two types of jobs, people who program robots and people who do what robots tell them to do. I do think that's right. And I can constantly try to convince the two of my kids that can type that they should get into development. One is very interested in it, but seems to be more interested in games than programming. So it's just going to take some time. Games can be a good course into programming, but if you there are plenty of people also that play games that have no interest in programming. So she's getting there, and then the other one is not interested yet, but we'll get her eventually. I gotta say also that STEM programs in schools are getting much better. So like they're teaching more programming early in life, which hopefully will get more people interested early, so that we can provide them the education to like foster the thing that they want to do. The same way that we would do if like someone showed a lot of interest or promise in basketball or in chemistry, we could do the same thing for programming. Mixolydia says, I think you may talk about this tomorrow, but the final project be a public repository in the all aboard group or in our own profile page. I would want you to put it in your own profile page, and I will talk about that tomorrow. So I might review it as part of the all aboard Bootcamp repository that you have, just because, or maybe even make a new repository because it is easier for me to review it. But then I will also show you how to push it into your own repository, because the goal is that the project that you're building is your project to keep. It's not for me, it's for you. It's for you to show as a portfolio piece. Sewell says, sure, it's going to change many lives, including mine. I've been wanting to learn Ruby on Rails for a while, and this opportunity came at the right time. I'm happy to help you. I'm particularly happy that you're interested in Ruby on Rails, because I think it is, I think it's the best. So. Okay. Thank you everyone so much for your time. Oh, Anonymous Attendee says, for someone who hasn't made separate apps for every session, do we have to make a separate one for the final project? You will, but the way that it's going to work, I think, is you're going to end up creating a new repository instead of creating a folder inside of your existing repository. So that should make it easier for you to manage. If the people on the program or on here that had recordings of the first part of the session before things got disconnected, I guess if you could figure out between yourselves which of you has the higher fidelity recording, and then if you could send that to me, that would really help me. So thank you. Cool. And also just like a note for tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be more relaxed than most of our sessions. We are going to be not getting super technical. I'm going to show you a couple things. I'm going to show you how do you install a gem, how do you install a package, how do you use Heroku, but we're not going to, these are not things that I'm expecting you to repeat, if that makes sense. So you might need them, you might find the recording helpful, but they're definitely not, they're not things that you're going to be like tested on or whatever. Anonymous attendee says that I'm a great ambassador for Rails. I appreciate that. Ernest says, I hope Zoom managed to record the earlier version. I really hope so too. I don't want to record it again. And I think that we had some really good content in there. Felipe says, please show us how to use Glitch. Hey, I'm happy to do that. I'll write that down. I can just show you briefly kind of how Glitch works. Wason says, solving the exercises myself has boosted my confidence. This is definitely going to be life-changing. Thanks, John. Hey, thank you, first off. And second of all, like the sessions are hard. The exercises are hard. It's a lot of material. They're not easy. Like anyone that's done the sessions kind of in the most recent 4 or 5 sessions has been hopefully understanding that they're not easy. They're supposed to be challenging. So I want to push your boundaries with them. And hopefully one byproduct of that, like you said, is that you're getting more confidence in how you can write code instead of just copy code that I write. That's not a very good profession, just copying code that I write. Okay, thank you. Thank you again. And hopefully I'm going to get the first half recording and this recording, gonna put them together, and I'll have it out to you a little bit later because I have to figure out how to do that. And I'll see you tomorrow.